Hello again, everyone. John Flynn here from Flynn Real Estate, serving Southern Ontario, based out of the Niagara region. Thank you once again for tuning in and watching. This week, I'm going to talk about the big changes coming to Ontario real estate. But before I get into that, I'm going to go over some numbers from last week of some places that I left out. They weren't ready, but they're ready now. So let's get into that before we get into the good stuff. So for the places that were not included last week, we have the month-over-month price changes from September to October 2023. Newfoundland and Labrador has the biggest month-over-month declines in these areas at 7%. Chilliwack and District down 4% month-over-month. Montreal down 2.5%, which does include Laval. I had a special request for Laval. There's only maybe 200 or 250 homes sold in Laval, so the data could be kind of choppy, so I like to use a bigger area, so it is included in the Montreal or the greater Montreal area. Ottawa down 2.2%, province of Quebec 2.1%, interior BC and Okanagan down just under 1%. And Nova Scotia and Greater Moncton had increases. Nova Scotia 4.5% and Moncton 7.8% month over month. Looking at the losses from the peak, Ottawa 22.6% loss from the peak so far. Chilliwack and District down 18.4%. Okanagan, interior BC down 15%. Nova Scotia down 10%. Same with Newfoundland, just under 10%. Province of Quebec down just over 5%. Greater Moncton down 5%, and Montreal just under 5%. Looking at those losses in dollar values, Ottawa down a whopping $193,000 from their peak last year. Chilliwack and District down $166,000 from their peak. Okanagan, interior BC, $112,000. Nova Scotia, $46,000. Montreal, $30,000. Not bad considering the losses elsewhere in this country. Newfoundland and Labrador down $29,000. Province of Quebec, $28,000, and Greater Moncton, $20,000 from the peak. Now, checking out the market balance, it is balanced market in Ottawa, Montreal, Chilliwack and District, interior BC/Okanagan, and province of Quebec. And this is based on the sales to new listings ratio. Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador are both in seller's market when it comes to inventory, and Greater Moncton in overheated sellers market, meaning there's not a lot of new listings for the amount of sales. One more chart I just want to show you before I get into the December 1st stuff. This is kind of a perspective look at things to see how has the price per square foot increased when you're comparing rents to ownership. So here is the chart. Our base year is 2013. I went 10 years back, and that is 100% for both of these. And you can see rent has fluctuated over the years. As rent has gone up, homes have got bigger for the most part. I know that doesn't apply to all areas, such as shoebox condos in GTA and whatnot, but in general, homes have gotten bigger. So the actual increase in the price per square foot when renting, the blue line, is up about 30 to 40%, depending on the location. Comparing that to the sale price or the ownership costs, we have gone up over 160% in that same period. So you can see the price per square foot when you're buying is a lot greater, or in comparison to where it was 10 years ago, than when you compare the leased price per square foot or the price for renting per square foot. And of course, we know that renting is still a lot cheaper than purchasing. Even though rent prices have gone up, or many say have skyrocketed, it is still a lot cheaper to rent than it is to buy. Here's a comparison that I posted on my Twitter this week. This is the same house, the same square footage, the same number of bedrooms. And you can see here to purchase it, all the costs and the $4,000 price tag you would pay every month, as opposed to renting it at just under $2,400. Okay, now into the big changes coming December 1st. It's like the big change in the real estate matrix. What will happen? Nobody knows. How will it change things? We will see. This is the start of open bidding, but I'm going to go through some of the bulletins here. No agent really knows how this is going to work. There's a lot of talk. Some people say, well, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody about real estate anymore, which isn't true. It's kind of simplified from what it used to be, but it's still very confusing when you're trying to wrap your head around it and put it into practice. So for those of you that have watched previously, I've talked about TRESA. TRESA is the Trust in Real Estate Services Act. It used to be called the Real Estate and Business Brokers Act from 2002, and it's still from 2002. They just changed the name and changed a lot of the regulations within it. Now, there's two main changes that I'm going to talk about today. One is the open bidding and the other is the representation. So here they are just itemized. They're itemized in three highlights here, but the two of them are combined. And the one we're going to talk about last, the most important one, in my opinion. So the first point, brokerages will be permitted to enter designated representation agreements with clients. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Clients and self-represented parties will continue, but customer relationships will be eliminated. This means that a party to a trade will either be a client or self-represented party. And lastly, the biggest one in my opinion, sharing contents of offers will be permitted with the seller's written direction. So what does this all mean? So I'm going to break down the two main points here in as plain English as I can and kind of give you a little history of where we came from and where we're going, first starting with the representation. So up until now, there actually has been three forms of representation when dealing with a real estate agent or real estate brokerage. I should say two terms and one that's not a representation. But anyway, there's three ways to interact. The first way is being a client. You're either a buyer client or you're a seller client, and you sign a contract that states as such. The second is a customer service agreement. This is for the people that don't want to work with a specific agent, but still want to show up and buy a house and need some sort of service or interactions with a brokerage to get that done. And the third really doesn't happen. I don't think I've actually ever done a deal with one of the three, but it has been an active option for people, and that is self-represented, where nobody's providing you customer service and you're not a client to anyone. You literally just show up and say, I don't need any of your services. I just want you to submit this offer for me. And I guess you would have to bring your own offer because customer service means that they would write the offer for you. But regardless, that was not an option that anyone really used. It was either the client or the customer. And it was a very confusing process because there were certain things you could treat people certain ways based on their status. And the lines were very crossed. And it was very gray and confusing. So I welcome these changes, but let's look at what the options are now. So now you have two options. They've really simplified the process. You're either a client or you're self-represented, and no one can be self-represented if the agent is already not representing a client. So that's kind of a little bit confusing, but just from talking to an agent in general at a party or something, that does not automatically make you a client or self-represented. There's a lot of confusion going around out there that you can't talk to an agent anymore anywhere because they have to sign you up as a client or you have to be self-represented. That's not how it works. The only time there is a self-represented individual is when somebody is talking to an agent that already has an agreement with either a buyer or seller. Then that person in discussions or whatever they're doing, looking at a house, open house, whatever the case may be, they have to make a decision if they are working with an agent or if they're self-represented, because based on that information, the agent has to treat you a certain way. There is a big change coming to multiple representation where the same brokerage, say, represents a buyer and a seller, and it's considered multiple representation. Now brokerages have the option for the brokerage to represent that client or a specific agent or sales representative to represent that client in the brokerage. So two agents from the same brokerage could be designated agents to different people, and it's not considered multiple representation anymore. So that is a very interesting dynamic too, probably long overdue because there are a lot of lines crossed when dealing with clients. Now, back to my statement about agents claiming that, you cannot talk to somebody anymore without them becoming a client or being self-represented. I just want to share a part from the bulletin that said there are such thing as implied agreements. So you could technically, be someone's client, or the agent could be your agent without having it in writing. Of course, RECO, the Real Estate Council of Ontario, always likes things reduced to writing at the earliest possible time. But in this notice or bulletin, you'll clearly see an implied agreement is still a form of agreement where a written document is not needed. So an implied agreement here, providing services or representation to a person in the absence of a written agreement, will give rise to a representation agreement. So it's not uncommon for people to work with agents, family members, friends, past clients. John, I want to buy a house. Let's go look. I don't have to sit down and sign them up with paperwork right now. And it looks like in the future, I won't. This hasn't been put into practice yet. But just because somebody wants to work with you, you don't need to reduce to writing right away. Brokerages and RICO would prefer that. But as it's written here, you don't need to. Now, at the same time, they are warning against certain things. And here's what they have to say further in that bulletin. Agents must be cautious in discussions and in any efforts to help someone who is not their client. The risk in exercising discretion or judgment, giving advice, offering opinions, or advocating on behalf of a person in an attempt to be helpful. So, of course, they don't want us giving advice if someone is not a client, even if it's, an implied client or not. If it's a self-represented person, we are not allowed to give opinions and advice unless it benefits our seller or buyer. So now that brings us into a self-represented party. This is where things kind of get interesting and the rules have really changed a lot, or new rules are being implemented. Agents are prohibited from providing services, opinions, or advice to a self-represented party in respect of a trade, including an opinion or advice on the price, terms, or clauses to include in an offer. So if somebody comes to us at an open house and says, we'd like to buy the house, can you write the offer for us? We have to be very careful. We can't recommend, well, you should have a financing condition or you should have a inspection condition. Only if it's in the best interest of our clients, the seller, we would recommend that. But we have to be very careful at the same time. We're not portraying to this person that we're acting some way in their interest or best interest. So it has to be very clear, and there will be paperwork to document this so that people know you are on your own. Everything we do is not to help you, it's to help somebody else. And this is what they have to say about that. Agents can provide assistance to a self-represented party if the assistance is to a service to the agent's client or incidental to a service to the agent's client. So if you come to an agent and you claim that you're self-represented, you're not working with an agent, the agent would either need to sign you up as a client or only show you one of their listings, because showing you another house is doing a service to you and not to their client. Now on to the biggest change, in my opinion, would be the open offer or open bidding process. And they don't actually call it that. They talk about it as a requirement to communicate the number and content of competing offers. This is where it gets interesting, so pay attention. With respect to competing offers, there are 3 key points to remember. The number of competing offers must be communicated to every person who is making one of those offers. So no big change there. If you get multiple offers, you should always let everyone else know that they're competing against, X number of offers. If the seller directs in writing the content of competing offers or select parts of the content must be shared with every person who is making one of the offers. So very clear. The minimum requirement, not the maximum, the minimum requirement is that if the seller directs whatever they choose, the price, the closing date, whatever, if they choose to make that public, it has to be at minimum disclosed to anyone else that's making an offer. And number 3, personal information of any kind that would identify the person making an offer must not be shared. So of course, privacy information, nothing's changed there, but just so there's no confusion, you can't disclose the names of the people making the offer to the other people or anyone else for that matter. Now here's where Pandora's box literally gets opened up. And this, again, when I talked about the previous things being the minimum requirements, the maximum requirements, there are none. Once a seller gives direction, as long as you're not disclosing personal information, you can tell whoever you want, however you want. There is no reins on this. And let me just read this one part of the paragraph to you so you understand what I'm saying. Nothing in the legislation prevents a seller from directing the agent to communicate the number of offers or share the content of offers with persons other than those making the offers, or prevents the agent from following the seller's lawful direction. So that is where the confusion begins. Who do you tell? How can you tell? And where do you tell this information other than the people actively involved in offer negotiations? Can you post this on social media during offer negotiations? Can you talk about it after? Say the offer's expired and it didn't work out. Can you put that in a listing? Hey, we had an offer for X number of dollars. The seller didn't accept it. We need more than this. I don't know. Like, this is where Pandora's box is literally opened up, and the world of open bidding becomes this unknown realm, and it could be a good experience or it could be some dystopian, offer nightmare. But I guess we'll see what happens and how agents will take advantage of this for their clients. Now, there's one more thing I want to add to this, just to kind of really put it in perspective. The legislation does not address an open offer process or put rules in place regarding how an open offer process would be conducted. It simply permits an agent to follow the seller's written direction to share all or select parts of the content of offers. So when it comes to the open offer process, there is literally no rules on what an agent can do as long as they don't disclose any private or personal information from a buyer, and as long as they have it in writing from the seller. So as creative as they want to be, of course, you've seen what happened with bidding wars in the last decade or so, holding off on offers till this date, putting prices low. Well, that is only going to intensify. And this is my opinion. We haven't practiced this yet, so I can't say for sure what's going to happen. But here is just a general scenario. So before we would wait, or agents would wait, they would say no offers until this date. And of course, then they would disclose the number of offers as time went on or on that day. And so everyone would know how many offers they're competing against. Now you could expand that process by saying, we need a 1 week time period to make a decision, or irrevocable period to make a decision when you submit an offer. So if you submit an offer, we need 1 week to respond. And in that time period, the seller or the seller's agent could post those prices of the offers on a public domain, as long as there's no private information. Maybe it could be on MLS. I don't know how the MLS systems or the individual boards are going to regulate this, because we're not allowed to put certain things in the public comments. So I don't know where that's going to come into play. That's a whole new dynamic too. But they could post the details of those offers publicly for that time period, while they're waiting for other offers, so that people can look at the house and they can see, hey, it already has an offer of $600,000 or $700,000. If you want to buy it, you're probably going to have to pay more, or maybe put a better closing date. But again, it's an unknown territory, so there's going to be all sorts of solutions and systems in place to try to capitalize on this for the sellers. It always seems to favor the sellers, these bidding wars and blind bidding or whatever has happened up until now. And I'm guessing the most agents, because it is the seller's sole decision to disclose this information or not, they will be using this to promote their services, saying, look at my system and how I deal with offers now. But it's going to be like the Wild West, and it's going to be a very interesting time when this happens on December 1st. And again, this is just Ontario. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I'd really like to know the feedback. And I know there's a lot of agents that watch these too, and they've been getting a lot of information from their brokerages. So I'd like to know what their thoughts are. And even with the representation, again, I hear a lot of things like you're not going to be able to talk to anybody anymore unless you have an agreement signed, which again, I don't feel is the case. But it'll be interesting to hear the feedback on this. And it's going to be very interesting once December 1st rolls around to see what happens. We actually don't even have any of the new forms yet. Those are still rolling out. So it's really down to the crunch time. And there's a lot of buzz behind the scenes with boards and brokerages and meetings and training. And it's going to be a very interesting switchover. So stay tuned for it and watch out. And I'm sure there's going to be some crazy stories to talk about, and the things that will happen along the way. Anyway, until next week, I'll see you then.